He told other women I was the most disgusting person he'd ever met, all while I was planning his financial ruin. My relationship with Mark spanned 3 years. The initial period was wonderful, but the final 12 months descended into a constant mental battle. He began demanding to see my messages, interrogating my daily schedule, and questioning every interaction I had. If a male colleague from work simply texted a question, he would spiral into wild accusations. He'd make subtle comments in front of our friends, hinting that I might be unfaithful. Whenever I expressed how much this hurt, he'd claim I was being overly sensitive and that an innocent person wouldn't get so defensive. The most painful part was my unwavering loyalty. I never strayed, not for a single moment, while he was clearly reflecting his own actions onto me. My closest friend, Chloe, was the one who uncovered the truth. We'd been inseparable since we were teenagers. One evening, after Mark had left for his shift, I showed her the latest barrage of texts where he was furious I was 20 minutes late from the store, insinuating I was meeting someone. Chloe's expression shifted, and she silently handed me her phone. It was Mark's active dating profile, updated that very afternoon. His profile boldly stated he was single and ready for a spontaneous connection. Chloe admitted her suspicions had been growing for a while. A mutual acquaintance had actually matched with him but recognized him as my partner from photos I'd posted. Chloe had been quietly collecting proof before shattering my world, wanting to be absolutely certain it wasn't some bizarre mistake. That night, we devised a strategy. Chloe would craft a fake profile and see if he would take the bait. The match happened almost instantly. He didn't just respond, he was eager. Their conversation was appalling. He told her he was unattached, complaining about his crazy ex, me, who he was supposedly trying to leave, but who just wouldn't accept it. When Chloe asked why he didn't just end the relationship, he replied, "She covers half the rent and handles all the domestic chores. Why would I walk away from that before I've secured an upgrade?" He began sending her screenshots of his chats with other women, and in these exchanges they would mock me. He referred to me as the most revolting being, a truly repulsive entity to these strangers. One message from Mark read, "I physically recoil when she initiates any intimacy." Another woman responded, "You're a better person than me for enduring that." "I'd have been gone," Mark wrote back. "It's a complex situation, but it's nearly over. I promise." These weren't isolated messages. They were to multiple different people. All of this was happening while he was accusing me of disloyalty. All while I was preparing his meals, washing his clothes, and desperately trying to demonstrate my commitment to him. I didn't reveal my knowledge immediately. Chloe and I agreed we needed more than just screenshots. We needed a comprehensive strategy, not for reconciliation, but for total devastation. For the next several weeks, I performed the part of the ideal partner, while Chloe continued her digital conversations with him. I smiled when he kissed me in the morning. I still cooked and cleaned. I even said sorry when he accused me of engaging with the pizza delivery person who simply handed me our order and drove away. The entire time my mind was calculating. One evening, Mark came home late, and I noticed a faint, unfamiliar scent on his jacket. When I gently mentioned it, he became enraged, stating I was being irrational and suggesting I speak to a professional about my trust issues. He said I seemed down lately, that I wasn't acting like myself. I just smiled and apologized, all while mentally cataloging another reason he fully deserved what was coming. I examined our shared finances. We had a joint account for household expenses, but Mark also had a separate savings account he was always boasting about. He loved talking about his financial discipline, how he was building a nest egg for our life together. The irony was crushing. Our bank records showed significant cash withdrawals on evenings he said he was working late. charges for high-end dining, boutique hotels, luxury stores. That's when I identified his true vulnerabilities, his pride and his bank account. I thought of my cousin, Lena. People always said we resembled each other, though she was the more conventionally attractive one, or so my family liked to point out. She shared my dark hair and eyes but was slimmer and had been a part-time model. She also felt she owed me for the support I gave her during a difficult separation the previous year. I called Lena and Chloe for an urgent strategy session and laid out the entire situation. Lena was immediately furious for me. She said this wasn't just infidelity. It was systematic emotional manipulation. She was completely right. Chloe showed Lena all the evidence she'd gathered, and Lena was stunned that someone could be so cruel while pretending to be the victim. By the end of our long meeting, my anger had transformed into something else, a cold, determined resolve. That night, watching Mark text on his phone with that smug little smile, probably telling another woman how pathetic I was, I finalized my decision. I had our plan, something that would make Mark regret every vile word, something that would strike at the core of what he valued most. Lena and Chloe were fully committed, and together, we were going to teach him a lesson he would never forget. First phase. Our scheme felt like an elaborate thriller, except it was my actual life. We decided Lena would coincidentally bump into Mark at his regular gym. He visited a fitness center in the city center every Monday and Wednesday without fail, supposedly for training. Now I suspected it was just another hunting ground. Lena secured a guest pass through a connection. We analyzed Mark's predictable routine. He always posted gym selfies with location tags. How foolishly consistent. We knew exactly when to place her on the elliptical machine near his preferred weight station. Day 1 of the operation, Lena wore athletic wear that was undeniably attention-grabbing. She texted me from the gym, "Target is in sight. He hasn't looked away since I entered." What followed was so cliché it was almost tedious. Mark accidentally dropped his towel near her. He started talking about fitness supplements. He asked for her number to share training advice. By that night, he was already messaging her. I sat with Lena on my sofa, reading every word, my stomach in a tight knot. Chloe arrived with wine and food, insisting we maintain our energy for the psychological battle ahead. The texts were exactly what we anticipated. Praise for her physique, questions about her relationship status, suggestions they get a smoothie together. The crucial detail? Mark had no clue Lena was my cousin. We share a resemblance, but not an obvious one unless you're looking for it. And Mark had long stopped truly looking at me. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Lena would date him, make him emotionally invested, convince him to spend extravagant amounts on her, and then we would reveal the entire charade. Meanwhile, I would keep pretending to be the clueless girlfriend, secretly relishing the sight of him digging his own financial and emotional grave. Lena and Mark had their initial date just a few days later. He told me he had a mandatory work dinner that night. I kissed him goodbye, wished him a good time, and then immediately drove to Chloe's apartment, where we monitored the entire evening via Lena's live updates. He took her to an incredibly expensive restaurant he'd never brought me to, despite my repeated comments about wanting to experience it. Lena reported he ordered the most costly bottle of wine, bragged about his high-powered career and his robust savings. He even had the gall to mention he was essentially single and concluding a stagnant relationship. When Lena sent a bathroom mirror photo from the restaurant, I felt nauseous. It was surreal, watching my boyfriend romance my cousin while I sat on my best friend's couch, snacking and planning his downfall. Chloe repeatedly reminded me this was all just confirmation of his character, and that soon, he would settle the score in every conceivable way. Over the following weeks, Mark became infatuated with Lena. he began canceling our plans to see her. Staying out later, returning home with a self-satisfied grin, all while Lena reported every detail back to me and Chloe. The spending started modestly: dinners, small presents, tickets to events. But Lena was tactical. She'd casually mention a piece of jewelry she admired while they window shopped. Suddenly, Mark was spending hundreds on a necklace to win her approval. She'd talk about a charming bed and breakfast she'd always wanted to visit, and Mark was immediately booking rooms. The masterstroke: Lena would forget these gifts at his apartment, claiming she was worried about losing them. In reality, it was so he couldn't retrieve them later. Then she'd bring them directly to me. I started accumulating a trove of pricey jewelry, high-end purses, and even a luxury timepiece he bought for her. All purchased with money he claimed was for our future. For the trips and experiences, Lena had a method. She'd have Mark book everything on his credit card. Then she'd fabricate a reason she needed to provide her share in cash, which he would instantly decline, wanting to appear generous. After the weekend, she'd transfer me her portion from the cash Mark had given her. Sometimes I used it for myself, but mostly I divided it with Chloe and Lena for our designated justice fund. We were accumulating a significant sum. One weekend, Mark told me he had a corporate retreat in a coastal town a few hours away. What he actually had was a romantic weekend with Lena at a high-end resort. Lena somehow persuaded him she required $500 in cash for resort activities and shopping. He gave it to her without hesitation. That money financed my spa day with Chloe at a local salon while he was away. We indulged in everything: massages, facials, manicures, all funded by Mark. We even shared pictures online, knowing Mark never checked my social media anymore. The whole time, Mark was growing more reckless with his deception. He started working late several nights a week, had weekend business trips. Once, he alleged his father was unwell so he could take Lena to a vineyard hotel. His dad called me that same weekend to invite us for a visit. I invented a story about Mark having a severe stomach bug. Maintaining my role was draining. I had to act as if everything was normal. I had to keep cooking, cleaning, smiling when he kissed me with the same mouth he'd been using on my cousin. Things grew more complex when Mark started confiding in Lena about his terrible girlfriend, me. Lena would record their talks, which was legal here, and send the files to me. Hearing him describe me as needy, insecure, and completely clueless ignited a fiery rage inside me. The most cutting moment was when he told Lena he couldn't wait to be free of the dead weight, and that the only reason he remained was because it was convenient having someone share expenses and handle all the housework. He literally called me his live-in maid who also pays rent. When I heard that recording, I hurled a mug against the kitchen wall when Mark was out. Chloe had to come over and help me clean the debris before he returned. But even through the anguish, the advantages of our plot were mounting. Lena convinced Mark to buy her a new laptop because hers was malfunctioning. She gave it to me immediately since mine was old and slow. She got him to purchase designer boots in her size, which coincidentally was my exact size. She even managed to get him to cover the cost of a weekend meditation retreat she never attended. I went with Chloe instead, amused the entire time that Mark was financing my peace while thinking I was at home folding his laundry. Around the 2-month point, Lena initiated phase 2. She began discussing how overwhelmed she was at her job, how she desperately needed a proper holiday. She strategically named destinations she'd always dreamed of seeing. Coincidentally, they were all places I had expressed a desire to visit. One evening, while on a date with Mark, she broke down in manufactured tears about never being able to afford a real escape. Mark, attempting to be her savior, instantly volunteered to cover it. Before the night ended, he'd reserved a weekend stay at a beautiful lakeside lodge a few hours' drive away. All costs covered. Here's where it became brilliant. The day before the trip, Lena called Mark, sobbing. A family emergency had come up and she couldn't possibly travel that weekend. Mark was crushed, especially since the booking was non-refundable. Lena, pretending to be considerate, proposed he take the trip anyway to decompress. Mark reluctantly agreed. The minute Mark told me he was going on a camping trip with friends, his cover story to me, I texted Lena and Chloe. The plan was active. Lena had already secretly given me the reservation information. As soon as Mark left for work the next morning, I packed a bag, collected Chloe, and we drove to the exact lodge Mark had booked for his weekend with Lena. We checked in using the reservation Mark had paid for. The front desk staff didn't question it when I provided my identification. The reservation was under Mark's name, but didn't list specific guest names. We enjoyed the entire weekend in luxury. Spa treatments, fine dining, nature walks with a guide, all billed to Mark's credit card. We even charged lavish room service to the room. Meanwhile, Mark was texting Lena about his disappointment, but how he was managing to enjoy his fictional camping trip with non-existent buddies. We took countless photos that weekend, careful not to post them anywhere Mark might see. Those pictures went into our proof archive, the collection we'd eventually use to demonstrate to Mark how completely he had been deceived. When I returned home Sunday night, Mark was already there, telling me tall tales about the massive fish he and his friends had caught. I nodded and asked polite questions, feigning interest while privately remembering the sensation of floating in a heated pool with a glass of premium wine he had financed. The pattern continued for another few weeks. One of my preferred tactics was the birthday gift plot. Lena mentioned her sister's birthday was approaching, and she wanted to get her something amazing, but was temporarily short on funds. Mark immediately volunteered to assist. He ended up purchasing a high-end designer wallet that Lena had selected, which she then gave to me for my own birthday, which was actually the following week. I used that wallet constantly, even when I was with Mark. He complimented it once, noting it looked high quality. I just smiled and said Chloe had gifted it to me, which was technically accurate. His savings were shrinking, and he'd started complaining to me about unforeseen work costs and how we might need to budget more carefully. The sheer nerve. Meanwhile, from Mark's perspective, things with Lena were getting more serious. He started talking about her meeting his circle, possibly even his family. Lena expertly avoided these steps, always maintaining the perfect balance, close enough to keep him spending, but distant enough to prevent their relationship from progressing in any real way. What Mark didn't realize was that we were building toward a grand finale. Lena had started hinting about an ultra-luxury vacation she'd fantasized about for years. A tropical island with exclusive overwater villas where a single night cost a small fortune. Mark, predictably, took the hook, began researching possibilities, trying to calculate how to pay for it. That's when we found out he'd been transferring funds from our joint account into his personal one to finance his double life. Money that was meant for our shared obligations, our future together. He had been stealing from me to woo my cousin. Discovering those transactions felt like a fresh betrayal, but it also solidified my determination to see this through to the end. As the third month of our scheme concluded, Mark was organizing this lavish island getaway, depleting his savings for deposits and purchasing new travel gear and expensive tropical attire. Little did he know, it was all steering him toward the final stage of our plan. But we weren't quite prepared to close the trap. Not yet. We had at least one more month of making him pay. In every sense. The best part? He remained completely unaware of what was coming. He still thought I was in the dark. Still cooking his dinners and doing his washing like the devoted partner. Still believed Lena was falling for him. Still believed he held all the power, but the control was entirely ours. And soon, he was going to understand exactly how thoroughly he had been defeated. Second phase, month 4 of our project, was when everything intensified. By now, Lena had Mark so thoroughly manipulated that he became careless with his lies to me. He'd work late but forget to call. He'd leave transaction slips in his jeans that I'd discover while doing the wash. Once, he nearly called me by Lena's name when he was tired. I had to clamp my jaw shut to stop myself from reacting. Meanwhile, our justice fund had ballooned to over $3,000 in cash from all the money Lena had acquired from him and distributed among us. Chloe had enjoyed benefits too. We alternated using the spa vouchers and fine dining certificates Lena procured. One night, Mark came home appearing anxious. He wanted to have a serious discussion about our money. It turned out he was having some short-term financial difficulties and needed me to take on a larger share of our living costs for a bit. Could I possibly cover the full rent next month and perhaps the internet and electricity too? He swore he'd reimburse me once his annual bonus arrived. I nearly exploded on the spot. This man was spending a fortune on my cousin while asking me to subsidize his existence. But I maintained my composure, nodded understandingly, and agreed to help. What else would his unaware girlfriend do? The moment he left the room, I texted Lena and Chloe. Time to increase the pressure. The next day, Lena called Mark upset. Her apartment required an emergency repair, and she needed $400 immediately. Mark, despite having just told me he was broke, miraculously produced the cash within hours. Lena took the money, thanked him endlessly, and then divided it with me and Chloe. We enjoyed a nice dinner out while her perfectly fine apartment remained untouched. But the real jackpot was the tropical vacation planning. Lena had persuaded Mark to book this outrageously priced resort in the Maldives. Mark was scrambling to find the funds, but Lena kept sending him images of the location, talking about how it would be the most magical week of their lives. I observed from the sidelines as Mark began selling possessions to fund this trip. His collection of limited edition sneakers he cherished was sold online. The expensive camera his uncle gave him was pawned. His stock investments he was always talking about were cashed out. All while telling me we needed to eliminate little luxuries like my occasional takeout coffee and streaming services. One evening while Mark was showering, I checked his phone and saw he'd taken out a high-interest loan for $12,000. The absolute insanity. Going into debt for a woman he'd known for a handful of months while telling his partner of 3 years that we needed to cut back. During all this, I was quietly preparing my departure. I'd secured a new place with Chloe's assistance, reasonably priced and secure. I'd been gradually moving my essential paperwork and valued items there. I'd started having my mail sent to a secure box. I'd even opened a new account at a different financial institution where Mark had no contacts. The strain of the deception was wearing on me, however. Performing the part of the supportive, ignorant girlfriend while watching Mark wreck his finances for another woman, even if she was my cousin acting on my instructions, was draining. Some nights, I'd lie beside him, battling the impulse to reveal everything and scream at him for being such a despicable, dishonest person. Chloe saw I was struggling and proposed we use some justice fund money for a wellness day. We reserved a day at a beautiful geothermal springs resort just outside the city. The irony was, it was a spot Mark had once vowed to take me for my birthday, but claimed was too expensive. The day at the springs was precisely what I needed. Soaking in the warm pools, getting professional treatments, enjoying mimosas in the morning, all while knowing Mark was at his job, stressed about money, completely oblivious that he was underwriting my recovery. It felt like perfect retribution. When I got home that night, Mark was already there, which was unusual. He seemed nervous, moving restlessly around the apartment. My stomach tightened. Had he discovered our plan? But no, it was something else completely. He sat me down and told me he'd been doing some deep reflection on our relationship. This was it. He was going to end it. After all these months of deception and infidelity, he was finally going to break up with me to be with Lena openly. I prepared my fake shocked expression, already thinking about how I'd contact Lena and Chloe the second he left to tell them we needed to move faster. But that isn't what occurred at all. Instead, this unbelievable person got down on one knee and presented a ring box containing an engagement ring. He started saying how he'd been withdrawn recently because he was dealing with some personal challenges, but had realized I was the person he wanted to be with forever. That sometimes you don't value what you have until it's almost gone. That he wanted us to recommit. I was utterly speechless. Was this his scheme to secure me with a proposal while still seeing Lena? Or did he plan to cut things off with her? Either way, it was the most desperate, pathetic gesture imaginable. The ring was modest, nothing like what he'd previously described. Clearly, his financial situation was more dire than I'd realized. I stood there motionless, my brain rapidly evaluating scenarios. If I accepted, it would grant me more time to exact maximum revenge. If I refused, the operation would conclude prematurely. I did what any sensible woman in my position would do. I started crying. Not completely faked. They were tears of pure fury, and told him I required time to consider. That his recent behavior had caused me significant pain, and I wasn't certain we could repair the damage. That I cared for him, a lie, but needed room to think about his proposal. Mark was devastated but tried not to show it. He said he understood and would give me the space I needed. He even proposed I go stay with my sister for a few days to gain perspective. I almost laughed aloud. He was attempting to get me out of the apartment so he could invite Lena over. I pretended to agree, packed a suitcase, and went directly to Chloe's apartment. The minute I arrived, I called Lena and informed her of this unbelievable new development. She was equally stunned. What kind of person proposes to one woman while actively organizing a pricey romantic escape with another? We resolved to use this new circumstance to our benefit. Lena would act particularly demanding and high maintenance in the coming days, truly testing Mark's financial limits. Meanwhile, I'd keep him uncertain about the proposal, requesting more time and distance while actually using that time to complete my exit strategy. Over the next week, I remained at Chloe's but maintained communication with Mark. I sent him messages like, "Still processing, need more time." He replied with increasingly anxious texts about his love for me and his willingness to do anything to save our relationship. About 10 days after the proposal, Mark called me, sounding strained. He needed to discuss something crucial face to face. My pulse quickened. Had he somehow uncovered our scheme? I agreed to meet him at a cafe the next afternoon, then instantly called Lena and Chloe for a crisis meeting. We decided I would wear a discreet recording device so they could listen from Chloe's car parked nearby. If the situation deteriorated, they'd be ready to step in. We also prepared an explanation in case Mark had somehow learned what we were doing. What Mark wanted to talk about wasn't our plot at all. It was his finances. He confessed he'd made some poor monetary choices lately and was in a serious bind. He'd exhausted his credit lines, taken out loans, and even borrowed from his coworkers. He needed my assistance to recover. Specifically, he wanted me to take out a loan in my name to combine his debts. He guaranteed he'd repay it, that it would only be temporary. He even implied it could be the foundation of our life together, showing we were a unit that supported each other during hard times. I sat there amazed at the gall. This man had spent thousands on another woman, lied to me for months, and now wanted me to assume debt to fix his financial mess. A mess he created by trying to impress my cousin. It required every ounce of my willpower not to splash my iced tea in his face. Instead, I told him I needed to contemplate it, that it was a major commitment, that I was still considering his proposal, and this introduced a new layer of complexity. I could see the panic in his eyes as I departed, promising to get back to him soon. The moment I returned to Chloe's car, we all erupted in disbelief. The sheer boldness of this man was almost admirable. Lena immediately began orchestrating the next step. She would tell Mark she'd received an unexpected work bonus and could now contribute a substantial amount to their vacation. All he needed to do was finalize the bookings and she'd pay him back for her portion. Of course, that repayment would never happen, but Mark was unaware. Over the subsequent days, Mark secured the final reservations for their Maldives trip. He'd had to ask his cousin for a loan to cover the last amount, but it was done. All non-refundable, all booked under both their names. The vacation was set to begin in exactly 14 days. Their flight would depart on a Friday morning, which meant we had 10 days to execute the last phase of our plan, and Mark was completely oblivious to what awaited him. Totally unaware. Final phase. Those last 10 days before Mark's intended Maldives getaway were among the most tense and thrilling of my life. We had every detail mapped out, but the risk of him figuring it out or Lena making a mistake was always present. Meanwhile, Mark was growing more frantic about money. He kept messaging me about the loan, saying things like, "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical, and this is about our life ahead." The nerve of this man expecting me to go into debt for him while he planned a luxury trip with another woman. I mean, technically it was my cousin operating under my direction, but the principle remained. I finally consented to have dinner with him to talk about our relationship and the loan. I selected a moderately priced restaurant where we'd celebrated an early anniversary, partly for sentimental reasons and partly because I knew his budget was stretched. For this occasion, I took extra care with my appearance, ensuring I looked my absolute best, wearing a green dress he'd always liked. When I walked in, Mark's face brightened with optimism. He'd been afraid I was going to terminate the relationship, but my demeanor suggested otherwise. We ordered and made strained conversation while he kept looking at my left hand, noting I hadn't worn the modest engagement ring he'd offered. Finally, I addressed the main issue. I told him I'd been deeply reflecting on our partnership, on the future, on my genuine desires. His expression became solemn and hopeful. Then I delivered the first shock. I told him I'd looked into the loan he wanted me to take and could likely get approved for $20,000. The relief on his face was immediate, like a weight had lifted. He reached for my hand across the table, holding it while saying how much this meant. How he would absolutely repay me. How this confirmed we were destined to be together. I smiled and said there was a single stipulation. I required complete access to all his financial documents before proceeding with the loan. Bank statements, credit reports, everything, so I could fully comprehend the situation. His face went rigid. I kept my look innocent, as if this was a perfectly standard request from someone about to take on their partner's financial obligations. He stammered that it wasn't needed, that he'd manage the payments, that I shouldn't concern myself with the specifics. I insisted, stating this was mandatory, that if we were building a shared life, there had to be total openness. Mark looked ill. He excused himself to the restroom, taking his phone. When Mark returned to the table, he had regained his calm. He agreed to show me his records soon, but said the immediate priority was the loan application due to urgent pressures. I nodded sympathetically, while mentally logging another instance of his manipulative nature. I told him I'd visit the bank on Monday, this was Saturday night, to begin the process. His relief was evident. Little did he know I had no plan to secure any loan for him. Over the weekend, Mark was exceptionally attentive and affectionate, making me breakfast, suggesting we binge-watch my favorite series, even tidying the apartment unprompted. All while constantly texting Lena about their impending trip, now just 7 days away. Monday morning arrived and I told Mark I had my bank appointment. I wore a business casual outfit and left the apartment as he wished me success. Where I actually went was to meet Chloe and Lena at our usual spot to put the finishing touches on our scheme. When I returned home that evening, Mark was waiting anxiously. I told him the bank required additional processing time, but that the outlook was good. He tried to conceal his frustration and worry, but I noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he embraced me. 3 days before the trip, Lena played her ultimate card. She called Mark, crying, saying a close relative had been hospitalized and she might need to travel home instead of going to the Maldives. Mark panicked, started proposing alternatives. Could they reschedule the trip? No, non-refundable. Could the relative wait? She was appalled he would ask. What if he accompanied her to see the relative? No, family only during such times. After letting him worry for a full day, Lena called back with positive news. The relative was stable and the medical staff said immediate travel wasn't necessary. The Maldives trip could continue as planned. Mark was so relieved he actually sent her a gift basket as a get-well present for the relative. A basket that was delivered to my new apartment where Lena was actually spending most of her time as we prepared for the endgame. 2 days before the trip, Mark was a wreck. The bank, meaning me, still hadn't approved the loan he needed. He was attempting to pack for the Maldives while concealing his luggage whenever I was around. He was balancing texts between me and Lena, trying to maintain both relationships. It was almost pitiable how low he had sunk. Almost. The night before the big trip, I told Mark I needed to discuss something important. His face lost color. He probably assumed it was about the engagement or the loan. Instead, I told him I was going to stay with Chloe for a few days because I required space to think about our future. His relief was visible. This solved his problem of how to depart for the airport without me becoming suspicious. What Mark didn't know was that while he was at work the previous day, I'd already moved the majority of my remaining possessions to my new home. All that remained were some clothes and personal items I could easily fit into one suitcase, which I packed while he was showering. As I prepared to leave, Mark hugged me tightly and said he hoped I'd have an answer about our future when he returned from his business trip on Sunday. The fact that he could deceive me so effortlessly after 3 years together still shocked me. The instant I closed the apartment door, our final sequence began. Operation Total Reckoning was officially active. I went straight to Chloe's place where Lena was waiting. We ordered food, opened sparkling cider, and reviewed our plan one final time. The next morning, Mark would go to the airport believing he was about to experience the romantic vacation of his dreams with his stunning secret girlfriend. Instead, he was about to face the most humiliating day of his life. We hardly slept that night, too energized by anticipation. At 6 a.m., Lena texted Mark, "Good morning. So thrilled for today. Can't wait to see you at the airport." Mark replied instantly, "Just finishing up here. See you at Terminal 2 at 8:15. Still can't believe this is happening." At 7 a.m., we watched via the building's security feed as Mark left with his suitcase, looking more joyful than I'd seen him in a long time. The moment his car drove off, Chloe, Lena, and I got into Chloe's car and headed to the airport ourselves. Not to travel, just to witness the unfolding drama. We arrived at Terminal 2 around 8 Sour and found a seating area with a clear view of the check-in counters. Mark showed up at 8:10, scanning the crowd eagerly for Lena. He checked his phone, texted her, then got in the check-in line for his flight. At precisely 8:30, when Mark would be nearing the front of the line, Lena sent him the message we had meticulously prepared. It was a group photo of me, Lena, and Chloe together, all grinning triumphantly. Underneath it, Lena wrote, "Surprise. Hope you enjoy your $15,000 solo vacation. Your girlfriend knows everything." We watched from our concealed position as Mark received the message. He halted in the middle of the line, staring at his screen. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to utter horror within moments. He looked around frantically as if he might spot us. Tried calling Lena immediately, straight to voicemail since she'd blocked his number. Tried calling me. Same outcome. Mark stepped out of the queue, still gazing at his phone in stunned silence. He collapsed onto a nearby seat, typing furiously, probably sending desperate texts that would never be read. We observed this for nearly 15 minutes before he finally stood up and walked like a ghost toward the exit, pulling his suitcase behind him. Mark spent the entire day trying to contact us from various numbers, leaving increasingly distressed voicemails. We ignored them all, focusing instead on phase 2 of our final plan. I had also left a carefully composed letter on the kitchen counter, detailing everything we knew, along with printed copies of some of his most cruel messages about me, including the ones where he called me revolting and his live-in maid who also pays rent. The letter clarified that if he attempted to contact me or Lena again with any intimidation, the complete evidence file would be sent to his family, his employer, and made public. Was all of this strictly essential? Perhaps not. Was it incredibly satisfying after months of his psychological games and infidelity? Without a doubt. That evening, Mark appeared at the apartment to find he was locked out. The security footage captured his breakdown in the corridor, as he realized the full extent to which he'd been outmaneuvered. Over the next several days, Mark experienced the full spectrum of emotions. He sent emails pleading for mercy, then angry ones labeling us psychotic, then sorrowful ones about how he'd face professional ruin if he couldn't repay his debts. Exactly 1 week after the airport incident, we enacted the last component of our plan. Lena, Chloe, and I treated ourselves to a weekend at a beautiful local hotel, paid for with the remainder of our fund money. While enjoying the amenities, we each posted a single photo to our social media. Predictably, this prompted another wave of desperate communications from Mark, now using his friend's phone since we'd blocked all his contacts. He couldn't fathom how we could be so callous. He asserted that his actions weren't as bad as how we'd obliterated his life. The lack of insight was breathtaking. In the months that followed, Mark attempted various methods to reach me. He even mailed a letter to my sister's address. She forwarded it to me unread. What he hasn't done is returned the money he took from our joint account, or provided his family and friends with a truthful explanation for why he had to move back home at 31. Regarding the financial fallout, Mark is apparently working multiple jobs to pay down his debts. The vacation packages, airfare, and hotel bookings were all non-refundable, just as Lena had insisted during the booking process. His credit rating is ruined. His savings are obliterated. Meanwhile, I'm flourishing in my new home. I've received a promotion at work. I'm adorned in designer accessories that Mark technically purchased. I'm organizing a genuine holiday with Chloe and Lena next summer. One that we will finance with our own earnings, because we aren't pathetic cheaters who need to manipulate others to obtain what we desire. Last week, Mark appeared at my building in the early hours, clearly intoxicated, sobbing into my video doorbell about how he'd made the worst error of his life and would do anything for reconciliation. I watched the live stream from my phone, comfortable in my bed, and did the only sensible thing. Shared the video with Chloe and Lena so we could all appreciate the moment, then notified building security to have him escorted away. After numerous missed calls, he finally stopped. I slept soundly that night, knowing he was experiencing the consequences while I was absolutely thriving. That, everyone, is what you call justice, and it is spectacular. If you believe this story deserved to be told, please like this video and follow Winds of Thought for more journeys from darkness into hope.